Everybody. I'm Judy Clem on behalf of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. We are delighted to host you for our urban foraging program this evening. And we created this program to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. So I'm very excited that we have Nina here with us tonight. She's going to really shed some light on new concepts for us in our community. For those of you who don't know, the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory is celebrating our 35th anniversary this year. We're a nonprofit organization that was formed after community members successfully came together to save the historic property of the Oak Park Conservatory from demolition. And over the years, the Friends have supported the conservatory with grants and hundreds of volunteers to support events and the care of plants in the facility, along with education programs such as this in our community. So I did turn on the record button, so we're recording the program. And if you have any questions, I think you'll be able to just ask them since we're going to be a small group this evening. So you'll be able to unmute and just ask your questions. But if you want to use the chat box, you are welcome to do so. Um, and now I would like to introduce Kayla, my colleague on the board of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, and she will introduce our guest speaker tonight. So let me just say a few words about Kayla. Kayla Chase is our membership chair for the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. She is also a master gardener, and she is a super active person in our community. And so I'm just delighted to have her here this evening, and she arranged for our very special guest, Nina, tonight. So Kayla, I'll turn it over to you. And then if we have a small enough group, we're just going to invite people to turn on their mics and ask questions when Nina's ready for that. Okay, Kayla?
Awesome. Yeah, I just want to take a second and introduce our speaker, Nina. I was actually first introduced to Nina and her immeasurable knowledge of the natural world when she gave this really in-depth, really insightful lecture with the Plant Chicago. So she's a Midwest forager, an artist, and is actually currently finishing her graduate MSc in ethnobotany. So she's actually joining us from Kiev in Ukraine. So it's a bit early for her. So it's good morning. It's good morning to Nina. She is the owner of Loveren Collections, and then a part of which is her everyday forage section, which we're going to talk about. I'm actually so excited. I'm incredibly excited to have Nina on here and just really continue to learn from her and her wealth of knowledge. So with that, please, Nina, take it away.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Judy, as well. And yeah, just thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but I'm looking because we are a nice intimate group, and something I really love to do briefly, if that's okay with you all, is to kind of just go around, and if you could just say your name, and if you've ever foraged before, and if perhaps you have a favorite perennial, if that's even logical or possible. We have a lot to cover, so if we could keep it a little bit brief, but I do think it's important to start building community in this way. And because we are a nice intimate group, it would be great to just say hello to everybody quickly, and then we'll dive right into it. Does that sound okay for everyone?
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
We could do popcorn style if that's okay too. So maybe I could start. My name is Nina. I have foraged before, and my favorite perennial currently will probably be this elderflower, mainly because my new landlord decided that she needed to change the internet here, and she brought in her little kid, which was great, but he had this crazy cough, and I'm like with COVID. And so for me, this is kind of it's been a helpful mental plant to have around for its antiviral properties. And so yes, that's currently my jam. So maybe we can hop over to maybe Elizabeth.
My name's Elizabeth Olympio. I have not foraged before. I don't even really know what it is, so that's why I decided to join. And well, I just know it's eating from the land, but I just know I should never eat from what I don't know, and I don't know anything, so I just stay away from berries. And favorite perennial? And that's also kind of embarrassing because like I don't even know perennials. I guess I would say irises. Is that a perennial?
That is a perennial, yes.
Okay, that's my
And
favorite flower.
honestly,
So I think irises.
I love it. Welcome. And honestly, I think throughout the course, I'm hoping you'll find too that like you do know more than you think. And there's always room for growth because yeah, I definitely started with like, what's a Christmas tree? I know a Christmas tree. What is it? You know, so you can't start from any lower than that. Cool. Do you want to popcorn
I'll
over to
pass
someone else?
it to Barbara. Are you ready? Okay, could you just unmute and then you
I'm completely new to urban foraging, and that's why I joined this group. My favorite, I love perennials. Right now, Baptisia is one, and perennial geraniums I'm very fond of. I'm very curious. I hope you can answer a question because I have a lot of, I would call them wild onions in my garden. And I want to find out if if these are something that I could use in cooking like scallions. So anyway, it's great to be with all of you.
Wonderful, welcome. And yes, you can. I've used a variety of different alliums, the flowering parts to like top up with salads and stuff like this, but also yeah, the kind of like the wild onion, the greens you could just chop up, and yeah, alliums.
Okay.
There are some that are like more ornamental, that yeah, I think sometimes it's advised like, oh, like don't necessarily eat like the really big like globe ones. And so I haven't tried those. But outside of that, like I mean, I've eaten so many varieties of alliums. And
Okay, I'm gonna wait for your expertise.
it sounds good. And if you want to popcorn over to someone else.
Let's see. Hilda is on my screen.
Hilda, where are you?
Hilda, can you unmute? Are you able to unmute your computer, Hilda, so we can hear you? Sorry.
Yep, there I am. Okay.
You are. Hi.
Perfect.
Huckleberries.
Nice. Yes.
I've blueberries. Let me see, what is the other? I have a large tree like mulberry. No, not mulberry. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Anyway, but that's about the extent of my foraging.
I love it. You picked all the great berries, so amazing. Welcome. Would you like to choose someone else to maybe just say hello, pop in?
I'm not on this. I'm not showing a screen here of all the people, so somebody else will have to do that.
Maybe we could pop over to Shar. Am I saying that correctly? Share.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm a homeschooling mom and science enthusiast. In our neighborhood, we seem to have a ton of mulberries springing up everywhere. But I will tell you, I have a huge pawpaw curiosity and persimmon. I just love like the different structures of those trees. And we're going to be planting stuff in our yard. I kind of get to do a clean slate in certain areas. So I'm really excited about planting those.
I'm so excited for you. Pawpaws are amazing. They do take some time to fruit, right? But I mean, I think they're absolutely incredible. And in Michigan, there's a bunch of like old growth stands of them, and it's just the most amazing. Yeah, it's an amazing experience to walk under them, and you have all these different pawpaw fruits coming out. And so we won't be covering those today, but I'd be happy to ramble to you about them. And there's a couple books out there too, like For the Love of Pawpaw or something. Oh yes, Barbara.
Okay, I'm curious because you said you're in the Ukraine, but you know about Michigan. So can you clarify?
Yeah, I'll talk about myself a whole bunch. Don't worry. Yeah. I'm a Midwesterner. I have Ukrainian background. My grandparents are in Ukraine or from Ukraine. And yeah, just doing some plant ancestral work here while I'm here in Europe. And yeah, born and raised in,
Okay.
born and raised in Michigan, lived in Chicago for like 12, 13 years. So
Okay, well, we'll be waiting with interest.
thank you for that question though. But yeah, but so in Michigan, there's a couple of books out there in regards to pawpaw, if you don't know them, Charlotte, but For the Love of Pawpaw is really great. And there's some cool pawpaw festivals if you haven't been to. And yeah, I'm happy and excited for you. I have a few years ahead of you at the El Paseo permaculture garden. We planted a couple pawpaws in there. So it's been now 2 years. So it takes, I think, about around like 10 years to fruit. So yeah. Would you like to choose someone if you can see?
I'll go next. I'm Sue Boyer, and my husband Ken is here as well. And we're sitting on our porch, so if we get too noisy, just tell us to mute and we'll shut the noise up. In terms of foraging, from my perspective, as a Girl Scout, we did a lot of foraging out there and tried to help the kids learn what was good and what wasn't. I haven't done it in a long time though. And I do have a background from the Ukraine. That's where my father's family came from. And they did a lot of mushroom picking. I mean, they knew how to go out in the woods. So as a child, I would go with them here in the United States. And they would go out and pick mushrooms. And I guess they did well because no one died from eating them, as far as we know. And that's my experience with foraging.
Oh, I love it. Well,
I have one comment. This is Ken.
Hi, Ken.
We have a lot of neighbors and we have a lot of foragers in our neighbors, amongst our neighbors, particularly the children who come down our alley and eat my raspberries.
Good. I'm glad
What
you
to do about this problem?
Nothing.
You're saying you're not sure about that problem, how you feel about it, huh?
Well,
You're
we'd like to
nourishing,
be first, but-
nourishing the youth, right? Nourishing those future generations. And I very much appreciate you sharing your bounty and exciting the kids. Welcome both of you. Is anyone else? Who are we? Did we get Amanda?
I can go next. I'm Amanda. I am in Oak Park. Let's see. My favorite perennial, Barbara, you actually took it, was the Baptisia or the false indigo. I love that. But since I have an entire row of peonies blooming right now, that is right now holding the #1 spot with their fragrance. I have very limited experience foraging. I spent one Mother's Day with my mother trying to do a morel hunt. We did not find anything. We just gossiped the whole time. And then I spent a really enjoyable afternoon with a naturalist walking around a lake in Alaska. And I just became so fascinated with everything that she could point out and explain. Like I learned about chaga on trees and how that's made into tea. And my son in Oak Park has been doing a program where he goes on hikes through Thatcher Woods. And so now he's pointed out where there's morels and other things living. So I need to keep up with him. And I'm really excited to be here and learn more about what is around us. Thank you.
Wonderful. Welcome, Amanda.
And
A
Sharice,
couple
I think the last one.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
well, I'm Sharice Rosen. I'm actually also Kayla's mom. And let's see, foraging. I don't have any experience with foraging. I'm very curious and interested in this lecture this evening and learning about that. My favorite perennial, I think right now, because it kind of shifts, right now I'm really enjoying watching the lavender kind of come up and seeing all the little flowers. And I've had a couple bees in my garden this morning, so that was delightful to see. And I don't know if you're going to cover like also foraging in some of our like urban forest preserves. Because I do enjoy taking hikes and going out into the forest also, and seeing what's there to forage too. But I'm very interested in this topic, so I look forward to your lecture.
Awesome. Welcome. Yes. So a few notes, I guess. I just want to shout out to all the Baptisia friends that if you are interested in a natural dye, Baptisia creates kind of interesting colors. And also in terms of the forest preserve, so, you know, ownership and like relationship to the land is like, it's such a amazing depth of intricacies. And so in Chicago, it's technically illegal to forage within the forest preserves. And so in this
Well, that's
lecture,
good to know.
yeah, and so in this lecture, in particular, like I'm trying to oftentimes like have this conversation too with the forest preserves, but also like to be able to reframe what it is that these forest preserves are for, right? And so for me, oftentimes I look at it as plant reconnection, and being able to see how different perennials grow within like a forested system. And so that's just something to consider, that like I do know that forest preserves have served as a place of like sanctuary for so much life, including human life. And that is part of like the legal kind of framework as well, that like we as humans and as people who develop relationships with plants can start engaging with the forest preserves as well, of like in terms of legality, you know, so that's a conversation that's like ongoing. I know that there's particular like legal structures and rights that are given to certain indigenous communities within Chicago, so that there are programs being able to be held in terms of like tapping maples and some harvesting. But yeah, that's a whole bucket of worms. So in this conversation and in this our conversation tonight about some of these plants, you would be able to see they are on the weedier species within the preserves. And I would highly encourage more, you know, joining one of the preserves, like kind of, they have these work days and stuff. So maybe there's like part of like collection. So if it's something like Urtica Diatica for the stinging nettle or something like this that you want to cultivate back into your own land and space and home to be able to harvest from. And so that's kind of my personal stance on it. I do know a lot of people who have different relationships to the preserves, but they do give out tickets if you're caught. And yeah, I think I'm personally just more interested in expanding that conversation within the preserves. I deeply believe that by connection and through relationships with these plants, whether in forest preserves or elsewhere, you know, as a community, we can really tend to the land and continue to cultivate, but that type of structure isn't fully, I think, implemented. So there's more of a conservation outlook. And oftentimes, like, you know, foragers who do go into the preserves, there's tension and like over harvesting of like Solomon seal or something like this, and disturbing some of the spring ephemerals. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Thanks for asking that question, because I was like, how can I interject? And so yeah, so yes. Did someone have a question? No. I didn't know if Kayla or Judy, if you wanted to go, and I promise I'll hop into this. I tend to expand a little bit on these lectures. So if someone did need to leave, or if we need to be brief with things, just please let me know and I'll stop babbling.
I think our group here is very engaged. So let's run with it. I'm excited to hear your presentation, and let's see, you know, if folks want to peel off, they'll let us know.
Awesome. I'll just share my screen now, and then if Kayla or Judy, if you wanted to talk about your favorite perennials while I set up, I'm happy to hear it.
Oh, I've got Coreopsis blooming right now, and I saw some of the super shiny green bees that were on it this morning. So that was my morning step into the garden. So that was exciting. There were two different types of bees that were crawling all over it, and they had the hip pockets full of pollen. So that was a great sign of somebody else foraging in my garden.
Love it. And Kayla?
Yeah, no, I was trying to think this whole time, and I'm actually really excited. My bee balm has spread. And so I'm really excited to try and figure out how best to use it this year, because now I have a ton of it. So just really excited about that plant.
Great. I'm so happy and excited for you. Bee balm's amazing. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you for engaging and being so excited about plants. There's one other thing that I love to do to settle in. I usually, for some reason, have like an issue with, there it is. Yeah, so sorry, I might be flipping through slides. I usually use my arrows and then just like boop, boop, boop. So, so just to kind of ground everyone in together, the last thing I love to do before we get connected into our presentation is if you're sitting in a chair, if you can plant both of your feet down to the ground. It's just a little grounding ceremony so that we're all kind of in the same space, despite being through this like kind of virtual portal and physically in different spaces. So if it feels comfortable and available to you, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. You're welcome to place one hand on your heart and one hand on your lower belly. And then we're going to collectively take 3 inhales in and out. And then I'm going to guide you through a little visualization. So take a deep inhale in and sigh it out. Another deep inhale in and let it go. And one last deep inhale in and sigh it out. With your eyes closed, I'd like for you to locate a place in your body where you feel love and gratitude. For most people, it's within the heart area. For some, it's in the lower belly. For some, it might be in your toes, wherever it is in your body. Connect with the space of love and gratitude. On your next inhale in, I'd like for you to imagine and to envision your ancestors, the ones who brought you to this land safely. Send them your love and your gratitude. Honor their journey, their struggles, their sacrifices, whether it was by choice or whether it was forced. Honor them and send them your love and gratitude. On your next inhale in, I'd like for you to imagine the indigenous communities whose land we're on today. Send them your love, your gratitude. The Miami, the Ho-Chunk, the Illinois, Potawatomi. Honor their sacrifices and their lives for keeping this deep wisdom alive and for sharing their home. And your next inhale in, imagine a plant that you came in contact with today. Whether it was a perennial in your backyard or a tree right outside your window, perhaps something you had for dinner. Send your love and your gratitude to these plants for joining you on this life journey. Take another deep inhale in and let it go. And when you feel ready and complete, you can feel free to join me back into this kind of virtual space. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to your Reconnecting to Perennial Plants in Chicago workshop. Do the boop boop. Gonna go. Does anyone know how to? I just gave a presentation the other day. I had the same issue, but it was there.
Yeah, when I use it, I have to sometimes I have to click with the mouse. I can't use the keypad for some reason.
Yeah, maybe I'll
Yeah.
just this right corner will be good, but
Okay.
see. Thank you. Yeah. Oops. Look at that. I feel like a granny. I'm so sorry, guys. All right. So, welcome. When I say foraging, what is it that you imagine? I know for me, it was imagining this like deep, deep forest, and yeah, just the wilderness. Oftentimes the word foraging is something that's kind of new and novel in some ways, because foraging was just a way of life. It's just a way that people lived, and they were able to go outside and build connections with the land. And so for me, the word foraging does feel a little bit new. There's people that I've met that are like, oh, it's just something we do. It's not necessarily like a thing. And so for some folks who have been, I guess, connecting with the land and having these relationships with plants for a longer period of time, aren't familiar all the time with the word foraging. But it is essentially building relationships with perennial plants that you may or may not have planted yourself. I, for one, did not know if I would be able to forage in Chicago, and that was not something I initially intended to set out to do. I grew up like most folks in the States. Well, not necessarily like most folks. I grew up in an immigrant community, Ukrainian immigrant community. And a lot of the ideas of success in life that I grew up with was to be able to get a good job and to be able to buy my food, have a house, and do all these different things, which I think is kind of normal for the American dream. And I did not grow up foraging, and I did not grow up really harvesting anything from the land. And it wasn't until I was able to live in Namibia. This is me in Namibia. It's my second home, where I started connecting with the land in a different way that I haven't before in the States. And for those of you who don't know, I have a background in visual art. I got really sick with the different materials that I was using, and my body was in this like toxic overload. So I was in my early 20s and I couldn't move my hands. I went to numerous doctors who told me I had Raynaud's, carpal tunnel, rheumatoid arthritis, like all these different inflammatory diseases that, you know, I didn't resonate with, and I knew something else was off, and it ended up being a toxic overload of the materials that I was using. And so through a personal cleanse of my studio practice as well as my diet, I'm thankful that today I don't have these sensations. But throughout that work, I started looking back into like the history of using plants and soils for natural dyes, and that was the beginning of my like connection to nature and connection to the land, was through my art practice. I was really fortunate to receive a Fulbright grant, which is what allowed me to travel to Namibia and to live there. And while I was there, I was able, just by a chance encounter, to be able to meet with the San, the Khoisan, otherwise known as the Bushmen of Namibia and Botswana. The term Bushman itself can be a derogatory term, but also with some San communities, it definitely is a sense of pride, and they say, no, I'm a Bushman. And so it depends on the community that you're working with. And so for me, with this particular community, it was a sense of pride. And so I felt like it was okay to be able to represent them in that way. And so, yeah, I was astonished really with working with them. It was a chance encounter through the Desert Research Foundation where I was living in Hobabis, where if anyone goes to Namibia, Hobabis will probably be the last point that you'll ever visit. And if anything, it's this very small town. It's a Herero community, and yeah, it's people usually stop to get petrol there before they go into Botswana. And so it was a very kind of secluded community. And I was there, and the Desert Research Foundation, through the organization, a permaculture organization I was collaborating with, invited me if I wanted to go and see where the San, the Bushmen, lived, and they were bringing community members back. And I was like, okay, sure, why not? And mind you, like the roads for hours driving these roads were just sand. They weren't really roads. And so I get motion sickness really easily. And so, so after a while, I'm just trying to hold my cookies. And there was all these different dynamics, racial dynamics, and as well as national dynamics, where I, as a white woman, was asked to sit up front with my now friend who was working at the Desert Research Foundation, who was an Ovambo woman. And all these San community members had to sit in the back of the trunk, and then in the back of the cabin where the elders sat. And growing up in the Ukrainian community, we were very much taught to respect our elders, and the children were always the ones to be in the back. And so for me, it was a very uncomfortable dynamic. But and I'm sharing this with you more so because this particular conversation changed my life. There's a huge argument between my friend Christy and the San community about their harvest. And they were kind of yelling at Christy, it's your fault that our harvest isn't, on time. And it was because Christy was delivering seeds to them, and unfortunately flipped the car because, again, there wasn't roads. Christy almost lost her life in that transit. She was in the hospital for weeks, broke a bunch of ribs, and it was really a traumatic situation for her. But the San were sitting there saying that they were the ones paying the price for this because they were, their crop was late and that they're starving. So we're talking about droughts in Chicago, definitely droughts in Namibia as well. And as an American and as someone who I think I identify more as an optimist, it was just oh, this is just so weird and funny. Why are you delivering seeds to them? I can do a seed saving workshop or something. Let me be helpful. How can I get involved? And it slowly was starting to dawn on me that these were Monsanto seeds, which is illegal in Namibia. And yet they were still being delivered to marginalized communities and being told, here, be self-sufficient. Whereas, the San community is Namibia's hunter-gatherer community. They are the people with such an intimate relationship with the land and with perennial plants, so much so that they're able to survive in the desert, and yet through different political structures have been removed. And so I'm sharing this with you because so much of this is present in the States. It's present with Indigenous communities in the US. And it's also been present, through different relationships, even within Europe, through traumatic removal of this relationship to the land. And so, I was astonished, here on the floor is eland root, which creates a beautiful, beautiful maroon dye and everything. And so I was really astonished through this connection. And I'm still working with various the Kwe San in northern Namibia to this day. And so when I got back to Chicago, that was a case scenario where I was trying to communicate with different organizations to be able to talk about these issues, and no one wanted to talk about them. They still don't want to talk about them. And it also brings us back to Chicago, and also the different red tape around relationships within certain wild natural spaces, and why, legally and responsibly being able to talk with you about perennial plants, we need to be aware of that and how we navigate through these systems and different, intentions and as well. whether it be preservation through removal or preservation through relationship. And so when I was back in Chicago, like I said, I started from like, I don't even know what a Christmas tree is. Like, like I know it's something for Christmas, and didn't realize the different varieties of different spruces. So I'm saying this as well, because I'm sure all of you have such a deep, immense knowledge as well. So it's a collective learning experience here. I'm still on that journey and that path as well. And also to encourage you, to let you know that like, no matter where you're starting, it's the perfect place. But yeah, so I was experiencing intense seasonal depression in Chicago. It was like that infamous like 2 weeks of no sun. And my body was feeling it coming from the height of the Kalahari Desert to Chicago weather. And I needed to get outside. And thankfully, we had a doggy, Aza, who unfortunately passed a few years back, but I basically just walked with her for hours at a time. And it was through these walking processes of walking at least like a mile in every direction from my apartment in Bridgeport, where I started connecting to different plants and starting to have my body readjust to like the seasons. And I realized how important fall is, going into Midwestern winters. And yeah, so that was the beginning of my foraging experience. And also been times like kind of presented to of like, why forage? Does anyone have an idea of like, why do you want to learn to forage? I know we've kind of talked a little bit about some of this, but just to kind of recap, like, why even consider it? It's a lot of work. It's, it can be deemed as like taboo, something that either like poor people engaged with, especially immigrant communities to the US. Why do it? Does anyone have any thoughts?
I would venture that it's a way to just be more more in contact with the natural world around you. It puts you into a place that's more present and also seasonal, because it changes based on what's around you. So it's a way of just connecting with the land.
Wonderful. Yes. Connection. That's like my main squeeze of like, it's about connection. It's about that intimacy, right? Like you said, to the land, to the seasons, of being human. It has definitely helped me. And so many people, right? Like connecting to the body, to the mind, to the spirit. It's part of self-sufficiency. There's a lot of foraging books out there that's more like apocalyptic. There's one on the West Coast that was put out, and it's more of like, if anything, like maybe, just maybe, you have an opportunity to be able to sustain yourself. But I will tell you that through traveling, it's been incredibly humbling to be able to walk in cave, to walk in the UK and be able to recognize familiar plant friends from the Midwest. Even when everything else is really new and could be a little bit overwhelming, it feels incredibly supported emotionally by different like medicinal properties, but also just with familiarity. There's a potential of treading lightly on the earth. That's something, there's quite a few like different research studies too, with like the Penan and Borneo of like foraging communities and the effects long-term on the land. We could see that as well within indigenous communities who tended to national forests in the US. Those were all highly curated spaces through indigenous communities versus what more of like a Western perception of like, this is wilderness, whereas for indigenous communities, it's like, no, this is our home. And so there's some really interesting books out there as well that kind of dive deeper into this concept of like, we got it all wrong, like these forest preserves are home to so many people, and conservation isn't necessarily by like just leaving it alone. Familiarity, yes, and it helps with definitely has helped with my health and finances. If I'm a little bit in a pinch, it is very helpful. And overall, it just tastes great. there's certain plants in the wild that just like nutrient, like micro and macro level, like nutrients. It's just incredible. And it's just such a pleasure, you know, to be able to infuse different flavors together. Oops. And so before we get started as well, if folks who don't know Robin Kimmer, she is the author of Braiding Sweetgrass. And I will just play this briefly because I do think it's just really helpful to be able to follow some indigenous like knowledge. So like when we do harvest, there is this sense of reciprocity.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants, who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? The protocols for the honorable harvest are not really written down, but if they were, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We're taught never to take the first plant that you see, and that means you'll never take the last. This is a prescription with inherent conservation value. And then if we encounter another plant, we ask permission. I've always been taught to address that plant, introduce myself, and tell it what it is that I have come for. If you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable for it. I know there are places where if you talk to a plant, they think you are crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. You can listen in different ways, pragmatically, intuitively. Look around, see whether those plants have enough to share. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us. And taking without permission is also known as stealing. And the honorable harvest counsels that we also take in such a way that does the least harm and in a way that benefits the growth of the plant. Use everything that you take. It's disrespectful of the life that's given to waste it. The next tenet of the honorable harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with us, so we have to model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing, we know, is a culture of resilience. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but it can also be a material gift. Weeding, caretaking, spreading seeds, helping those plants to flourish. We give songs, we give ceremony, we give our respect, we give fertilizer. Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. Water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
Yeah, I absolutely love how she puts every word of that. And I hope that wasn't patronizing for everyone, because I feel like everyone here is probably on that same page too of understanding that type of relationship. I have found yeah, there's different like phases of you know, with that like it almost like a scarcity mindset, where like a lot of beginner like foragers that I've spoken with, whether they took a course or you know, later we kept in touch, that it's almost this like over harvest, and I think it definitely comes from like a traumatic like sense of either scarcity or of like that disconnect, and then having that connection again, and like over harvesting, and then eventually like levels out. But especially for younger folks as well, I always found that, you know, kind of framing it is helpful. And so onto the good stuff. How do you forage in Chicago? Like, how do you forage in like urban spaces? And what if you're not foraging from the forest preserves? I forwarded on this message that Kayla and Judy will pass along after class, and it's a chart that basically helps you kind of decipher like what and where to harvest different types of plants, different perennials. And so if you like take a look at like downtown Chicago, I say reconnect to nature. It's a way to be able to observe the natural land, or to be able to observe like perennial plants. I wouldn't say natural land, but to observe perennial plants. It's not a place that I would necessarily harvest leafy greens. Chicago is kind of what we call like urbanite soil. And so there's definitely like different areas with different like lead contamination, as well as any kind of like pesticide residue, and through this type of I guess like cultivation and through the aesthetics that we're in the States, oftentimes it is laced with different types of pesticides. So I wouldn't harvest from there any kind of like leafy shrubby greens. Fruit trees are okay, so any kind of fruit, any kind of flowers, leaves are okay. There's been studies and research talking about different like filtration that trees have, so that it is safe to harvest even in urban areas. I would leave the herbaceous layers and mushrooms alone as well, just because of the taking in of different toxins. So oftentimes in the forest, people are just like, oh, it's just a green wall. It's probably not true for this community. But the way I'd like to break it down is do some permaculture concepts of like the 7 different layers. I put in 8 because I love to include the fungal layer and the fungal community. And I think it's oftentimes overlooked within these communities. And so I'm going to break down different types of plants through these different layers. So the first one is the overstory layer. So in Chicago, I consider this like street trees, different flowers, berries, leaves that you're able to harvest, fruits, acorns, nuts, seeds, different trees that you can harvest that I would consider overstory would be hawthorn, linden, oaks, maples, conifers. And we'll hop into those more in depth right now. Linden, Tilia americana. Who has had linden? We'll raise the hands if you've tried this plant, or you could just pop in and be like, heck yeah, no. Okay, so Tilia americana is one of my favorite street trees in Chicago, but also just plant allies in general. In the springtime, which you guys have missed at this point, but the leaves are a little bit translucent and you're able to eat it as a salad green. Really delightful, kind of like almost like the butterhead lettuce, almost as like a little nutty flavor. Once they start becoming solid in color, like they're not translucent, is the time where you stop eating the leaves. The flower right here, you can see here, these are more like the petals, and there's a bract right here. So this is considered the entire flower. And this bract is what contains a lot of the potent medicine that Tilia americana has to offer. She's a mild nervine. I love to take her before bed if I have a little bit of like kind of like rambly, like worrying kind of thoughts or something like this. I don't know that has Tilia americana as linden flowered by you guys yet. It's just starting to flower here, so I think, yeah, good. So you guys you can harvest her. You could it dries out beautifully. You could use it as a tea. You can infuse it in honey. If no one has had linden honey, I would highly recommend it. You can also just infuse it by putting like different flowers within the honey, or there's an actual beekeeper who I'm not sure how he's able to do this, but he sells primarily linden honey. And so the bees actually pollinate and create honey. That's just, it's incredible. Yeah, so this I have found that sometimes, like if anyone has like any kind of anxiety, sometimes before presentations I used to take linden. I stopped doing that because it made me a little bit sleepy. But I think it's just in general really great if you're a little bit on edge, if there's a little bit of anxiety, and she's safe to use on like a more consistent basis. So it's a really great plant. Right now, you'll probably be noticing any black locust that's starting to flower. So black locust is part of the Fabaceae family. It's part of the pea family, hence the flower shapes. Amazing, you can incorporate the flowers as a little floral tone into any kind of like fritter or any kind of pancake. You don't want to eat any other portion of this plant, but it's just kind of like, I feel like summer, like late spring, like summer time in general in Chicago, just eat all the flowers basically, and like make everything super pretty and your body feel like summer. That's primarily how I use this plant. I wouldn't use as a tea necessarily. Yeah, it's just something into like baked goods is really delightful. Maples. I'm not sure if you guys had your Samaras already dropped, probably. Yeah, I see. Oh my gosh. I'm probably a little bit late on this one, but just so you know, like with maples, it's not only maple syrup. You could definitely eat the leaves when they're still young and budding out. Obviously, we don't want to harvest, all the leaves themselves, but any kind of, like the ones that are leafing out and are more translucent, you could also incorporate into your tree salad. People have traditionally also eaten portions of the bark. I haven't tried that yet, but I'm curious in learning how to do this. It's more of this like rectangular sections of being able to pull out and to be able to chew and get a little bit more fiber in the diet. It's almost like this like chewing kind of leather, as well as the Samara. So the Samaras, you could treat them as like edamame. So I'm the one that's out there with like the pan dustpan, and kind of like scooping a bunch of them up, and you'd want like more of like the plumper seeds. You'd be eating this portion right here. So it's a little bit of processing. This kind of wing will dry out, and then when the seed is still plump and the wing is a little bit dried out, it's kind of like the perfect moment, not if it's too squishy. And then you could steam them, put a little bit of salt, you could put them in some ghee or some butter, coconut oil, whatever your choice is. It's really delicious. Conifers throughout the season, right? So I'm assuming right now you guys are having some spruce tips. Okay. What I love to have within conifers is the resin itself. In the summertime, the trees, the sap is flowing a little bit more. And so these are a little bit more for cooler seasons, but it is something that you can harvest if it's already like drier. You just want to make sure that you want to just make sure that over here, this like wound is still like sealed with the sap, because the sap is essentially like a band-aid for the tree. It has astringent properties. It's antibacterial, antimicrobial. I was having a toothache over the winter time, and I started to chew the sap, and the pains went away, and I haven't really had any issues since. Sorry, my presentation was a little slow. The previous picture was just me being in a winter wonderland, and I'll skip it. This is a little bit like gross maybe for some. I know you're like looking at my chewed resin, but I'm just so excited because it actually it's a bubble gum. Back in the day in the States, there used to be a gum that was made out of resin, of spruce trees. And so there's different spruces that will provide this. It takes over like 2 years or something for the resin to harden enough to be able to get this gum consistency. So if you harvest resin that is more sticky, it won't turn into this gum. But if it is aged, you can, as you can see with my chewed specimens, it definitely turns into chewing gum, and it's really amazing. And there's different drying times, and this is maybe go to, but too much TMI, but just in case you're wondering, you could re-chew it a couple of times. It doesn't dissolve in your mouth. So if like you want to go back and forth to it, it's really, it's an incredible, it's incredible. Spruce tips right now is something that you can consider harvesting. As you can see on the left, they're just starting to bud out, and then on the right, that's kind of to like the extent before they start getting harder with the needles. What I really love to use with these is infused in vinegar. You can eat them raw as well. I am definitely in it for the aftertaste. I have friends who just love it all the way around. They're a high source of vitamin C. Again, really great in times of any kind of flu season with COVID. You just keep wanting to get some vitamin C into the body. But yeah, I definitely like it. It's a little bit sour in the beginning, and then later on, like there's just like the most delightful taste that I hope you can experience. With infused vinegar, you can incorporate that into any kind of like kombucha, or if you wanted to pickle anything, or some people just have like apple cider vinegar kind of in the morning diluted. You could use that as well. Scots Pine, you know, it's not as present. I haven't seen too many of them in Chicago. I'm not sure if you guys have. Not too many. This is more for Michigan fans, but just so you know, with different pines, like you can eat the strobili, which is like the male reproductive organ, and it's also produces pollen. And you could treat it almost like an asparagus in the spring. Understory layer. These are again a little bit more spring. So red buds, Cercis canadensis, you can make into really delightful capers. You can incorporate them into ice cubes, the buds themselves. You don't want to obviously take too much for pollinating friends, but for next season, it's something to keep in mind, as well as the Magnolia petals. Magnolia, yes, I know, Judy, Magnolia petals. I love the facial reactions, yes. Magnolia petals are incredible. You can have them, and they're almost like this gingery kind of flavor for like these red fuchsia color ones. And then they kind of like swing into this like vanilla profile if you could get the cream ones. There's a couple native ones in Chicago. I'm forgetting the scientific name of them, but Possibility Place sells them. So if anyone's interested in purchasing some native, which you all probably know, but Possibility Place is a really great vendor. And yeah, I mean, I pickle them. You could put them in desserts. I think I put some food porn on here. I love making just beautiful vanilla cakes and num num num. So yeah, you can decorate them, make really special treats for people you love. So we're moving down the layer, right? So we have that overstory layer, we have the understory layer. We're moving into the shrub layer. So these are our June berries, our elderberries, currants, gomy berries, wild roses. June berry, service bear, Saskatoon. I realized that it's I think 8 o'clock. I realized that I hit my moment, but I'm just gonna keep going. So if anyone needs to leave, please feel free. Cool. It's a great source of iron. So it looks like a blueberry, right? And it's really high in potassium, magnesium, and antioxidants. It's delicious. It can be used comparably. There's a little bit more of like an almond extract taste, very subtle. It's from the seed itself. There is some concern over eating too many June berries, causing some sort of like gastrointestinal issues, because the seed of a June berry has a similar chemical component as like a seed to an apple. I haven't had any issues with it, and there was, I think there, I don't remember if there was one study or if this was just something Sam Thayer said once before, of just like you know, a child weighing like whatever 90 pounds or something like this will have to eat like at least like 2/3 of like its body weight to like, you know, feel sick. And so if you have that abundant access to June berries, one, I'm super jealous of you, and two, good for you, and three, just like space them out, you know. With that being said, everybody's body is different, and so there's some things that like I can't eat that majority of people could eat, such as like wheat and gluten and dairy. My body is sensitive to, whereas other people can eat it. So it's same with wild foods. So take things slow, and yeah, can go from there. I also started making, which I need to put a photo up here, but I made pemmican for the first time this last year. So pemmican is an indigenous Native American travel dish, I guess. And so it's made with June berries, buffalo, and buffalo fat. And so it's preserved almost into this jerky. And so, you know, I was closing out a whole bunch of life in the Midwest before leaving to the UK, and you know, said goodbye to my childhood home. And you know, I will always be coming back to the Midwest. Hopefully with some land in the future. But anyways, I ended up making pemmican on this journey back to Europe, and I just felt like it was kind of interesting. I had June berries that I harvested for like my folks, and then COVID hit and all these things, and they were still in the freezer, and so I ended up making this pemmican, and it's this dehydrated dish, you know, that's really delicious, and I would recommend folks making it. Elderberries are in flower too, Sambucus nigra. As I said before too, it's been really great to be able to harvest and to be able to make different teas. So I've been making a hibiscus elderflower tea that's chilled, and it's been really great. It's antiviral, anti-inflammatory. It could serve as a diuretic for any kind of flushing out. You can make it into a tincture with some honey liqueur, which is really lovely. I love it. As a tea, you can make elderflower wine, which is also really great. If anyone hasn't tried that yet, which is basically a ferment of sugar and water and the flowers. And yeah, it's a really lovely plant ally. You can, so here's the thing with like the preserves, right? Like you can find a lot of elderberry in the preserves in Chicago. What I would do if it was like access wise, and if I didn't have finances to maybe support like Possibility Place or something like this, is that with elderberry, it can be easily propagated. And so even just like a cutting of like the leaf itself here, with this entire stem and leaf, you can put it in a water. Some people said to put, like, there's all these studies, you know, all these studies all the time. You could put it into some sort of like root propagation. I found that that didn't work for me, but when I just popped it into water on its own, it rooted out. And so I ended up planting, not from the forest preserves, but they also line Michigan streets out in Southwest Michigan, if anyone's out there and interested in elderberry that's grown off the streets. And yeah, I was able to propagate about 5 of them and plant them in my folks' backyard, which is now someone else's backyard. But yeah, they're really quite easy to propagate. And so it's something to consider, you know, if bringing elderberry closer to you. So wild rose, right now there's a lot of the rose petals are out, which are just divine. My rule of thumb for roses is if it smells amazing, it's going to be amazing to eat. It's going to be amazing to put into your body. It's giving all that lovely plant medicine. Roses are known for like healing with like the emotional heart. We use hawthorn more for like the physical heart, if there's any like ailments or issues. But the emotional heart, right? Like so much of disease can definitely stem from emotions. Like for like, I think it's Lewis Hay that speaks quite a bit about this. But yeah, so it's a really beautiful plant ally for any kind of longing or any kind of heartbreak or anything, just a little extra boost. high in vitamin C. Again, during these times, it's really great to be able to consume. It's anti-inflammatory, so the immune system. Later on in the season, you could harvest the hips as well. You will want to kind of scrape out any of the little like kind of furs that are in the inside. I'm not sure what else to call them, but there's seeds and like the seed furs in order to make like jam. And yeah, you'd want to harvest it after like the first solid frost for the highest amount of vitamin C. So moving down from the shrub layer to the herbaceous layer, Artemisia, our mugwort, you know, there's also ceremony around Artemisia, the common ragweed. I know most people are like, ragweed, but can be used homeopathically to address any kind of sinus issues, even though it's, yeah, can be used. Purple dead nettles, lemon balm, Melissa officinalis. Oh, my heart, I love lemon balm, wild onions, ramps, milkweed, nettle. What's happened to them? So, see if I can, there it is. So stinging nettle, Urtica Diatica, there's two types of nettle that I'm aware of. There's probably, I think there's quite a few more. That like Chicago book of plants, you know, I think they list quite a few, like 4 or 5, but I'm familiar with Urtica Diatica and the Canadian, the scientific name is slipping my mind right now. But Urtica Diatica, Canadian wood nettle. Urtica Diatica is the European cultivar that was brought over through immigration. On the picture of the right is coming out in the springtime. You could see kind of this like purpley color. That's just to help the plant with any kind of frost, which then changes and evolves into this beautiful plant here. You could see the serrated edges and the elongated leaves. Wood nettle is a little bit more rounder. And yeah, it's one of my favorite spring greens. It's a highly nutritious plant. In Europe here too, it's anti-inflammatory. And I use it in comparison to like a spinach or something like this. They do have, someone might be able to inform me more about it, but it's like an acid of like the thorn or the spike that you get is really just this acid that dissolves with heat. So whether that's pinching this top portion here by just kind of like rubbing it between your fingers, and then you could eat it, the nettle raw, or if it's harvesting more of this top portion here, and then steaming it or putting it into like saute or something like this is really great with a pinch of salt. It's anti-inflammatory, so like different spas here in Europe, you can pay lots of money to get flogged with nettle, which is yeah. And so I take that, and so for my hands with any kind of issues and stuff like that, or any kind of arthritis, inflammation, I harvest them by hand. It's amazing. It's an amazing meditation process, honestly, because I feel like when I'm very present with this plant, and I'm able to pinch the tops off, it doesn't sting. But if my mind starts to wander, and if I start to worry, if I start to do this, like my actions become a little bit more aggressive, and she will get you. She will definitely get you. But I take it as a lesson, right? I take it as a lesson. I take it as a gift from this plant, because if I do get stung in a way that is a little bit painful, I'm also reminded that it is helping any kind of inflammation in my hands that you know, I previously like suffered from with the work that I was doing. Here on the right, you can see some photos of the seeds themselves. This one here, you can see, I think this one honestly is wood nettle. You could see that the shape of the leaves are a little bit different. And wood nettle, their seed structure is different than stinging nettle. And so stinging nettle seeds usually droop and drape down. but these are a little bit more like erectile and kind of coming outward. And so regardless, the seeds and the way that you can use the seeds, like if you do happen to find some nettle within the forest preserves, is again waiting for them to go out to seed and be able to harvest them and bring them closer to your land. They will spread. Some people are like, oh, I hate nettle. I'm all in for her. So I'll advocate for it if you're one of those that are like, I'm so highly allergic, I hate to be by it. And the thing is when she stings you, she can create some like bumps and stuff. And so it can be incredibly painful for some people. And again, that's everybody's body is different, and pain tolerance is different as well. Okay. Bee balm. This one's for you, Kayla. Monarda. So there's a variety of different monardas out there, right? There's so many different monardas, and there's a couple of perennial ones, but it's a wild oregano. So I would typically just harvest these petals over here. And it's great on pizzas. I love making different, pizzas that I could actually eat and enjoy. And so I use that quite a bit fresh. I've also infused it into honey. You could use it for any kind of cold, any kind of flu. You could dry out the petals as well and be able to use them in more of like a steam. So like later in the winter time, if you find that, you're having some postnasal drip or any kind of clogging in the nose, you can use that there as well. Go. Yeah, so the slide before that was the root layer. This was again something that I would be cautious with harvesting in different areas in Chicago. Know if it's in your backyard and you know that you don't spray, and maybe you got a soil testing done by the University of Illinois Extension, or if you've just been tending to your land quite a bit, I would harvest roots there or flowers. And so dandelion is one of the hardest plants to be able to forage and harvest in Chicago, I find, just because of the war on dandelions, which again was brought over, if you have any kind of European descent, it was brought over as a food source. So anywho's, dandelion wine is awesome. Again, it's a water sugar ferment, really fun to have. You could ferment it for longer to actually create some sort of alcohol content. You can mix it with different kinds of fruits as well and create like different varieties of kvass. It could be used as a topping, put in ice cubes. The roots roasted is really great. I would prefer to use chicory root on long term for a coffee substitute. It doesn't have any caffeine in it, but you can still get that kind of taste. You wouldn't want to harvest the roots right now, but you would harvest them later in the fall time. But the flowers are really what you're looking for. And yeah, the milky sap, I spend a lot of time in the sun, so I get little miliuses, which are little like benign white balls basically, and always loves to like be by my eyes. I have learned the hard way that it's not like a pimple. You can't pop it. You'll definitely scar your face. Don't do it if you have this. But dandelion, the sap has these extractive properties. And so I would just dab like 2 to 3 times throughout the day for just a handful of days. It really depends on where I'm at. I found that sometimes it takes like 2 days, sometimes it takes 5 days. But I dab it on these miliuses and it extracts it without scarring my face. That's the only thing that I've noticed, excuse me, that would get rid of basically these miliuses. And yeah, you want to be careful with getting it too close to your eye. This is my little niece Eliana, and she loves to smell flowers with me, and she's really curious about them, and I love her, so put her in there. Chicory root is again could be used as a long infusion. Right now, again, the flower could be used more as for like a natural dye. It was used as a World War II substitute for coffee. yeah, it can still be bought today as well, and at different shops as like a coffee substitute. It's sometimes blended in with coffee as well. Why is it so great to consume? Some people are like, oh, it's disgusting, and I'm like, oh, I disagree. But it's mainly the root contains inulin, which is a prebiotic for the probiotics. Did I get that right? Within your gut system. And so everyone's talking about, oh, probiotics, keep your gut healthy. This root, the inulin within this root helps nourish Perennial. Anyways, I'm going to change that slide. I'm laughing at myself, I'm sorry. But yeah, so it helps nourish your gut system. Burdock, these are all like our weedy friends, right? That everyone's just like, oh, and I would love to hear if anyone has actually had any of these before, but burdock root is divine. You can find it a lot in Asian cuisine and also in Asian supermarkets. I love to use it as a pickled root. I wouldn't, so it's a biennial, so it's not necessarily a perennial, but once it flowers out, like you're out of luck. But it's mowed so often in Chicago that you have a really great opportunity to harvest if you know the soil, you know the land. It's anti-inflammatory. It helps with the GI. It's really great for any kind of like skin conditions. You can make into spicy pickled roots, which is really great. All right, ground cover layer. We're getting there, y'all. You have a common blue violet, creeping Charlie. Again, it's part of a mint. You could have chocolate mint. And these are all plants that, like, working as a landscaper years ago, like folks really were angry at these plants. They really were like, oh, get rid of them, And it's, again, just listening to the conditions in which they're growing, and also just the nourishment that they can provide, and that relationship that could be built. Violet is often associated with like female breast health. And so I've worked with women who were just like, oh, get rid of that, whatever that is, it's all over, get rid of it. And again, when I was working as a landscaper, and once we started talking about, oh, like that's actually like blue violet, and she can dissolve different types of like tumors. There's been studies like infused into like oils and stuff, and being able to rub onto like for breast cancer. She's been known to shrink tumors. And so Susan Weed talks quite a bit about her as well. And so yeah, like it's amazing to watch people's perceptions change immediately, like, and like, oh, okay, you can keep a couple of those. Plants show up oftentimes when we need them. And if not, yeah, this is putting in ice cubes and dry press, making cute things. Plantain, plantago, you could have narrow leaf on the top here, as well as this broadleaf plantain. It can be used internally for tissues and externally. It's anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. It's great for bee stings. I can attest to this. I got stung like over here by a hornet. Oh my God, it's one of the most painful experiences. It was a freak time too. It was like picking up my dog, and I think the bee was around, the hornet was around there, and somehow I'm glad it stung me and not my dog, but it really got me. And I thank God I found plantain on the trails. Immediately you chew it up, you spit it on, literally chew it and spit it, and yeah, I could say that it got rid of probably about like 80% of the pain almost immediately. And I still I felt like a general sensation was around there. But yeah, I would highly recommend it. There's been kids who, on the beach or something get stung, and parents pop it on and they kind of just stop crying, like, oh, I'm good. It could be used as a poultice as well, and any kind of like infused in oils for an herbal salve. Either use either of them. I think, yeah, both of these are definitely found in Chicago. At our vine layer, talk about grapes a lot, and there's the grapes. I just wanted to point this out because there's a couple Grape Look-Alikes. If anyone feels to jump out, do you see any differences between the two of these?
Are we looking at the end of the vine there? That little stringy part looks different.
Yeah, just anything you notice. It could be the leaves, it could be the tendrils, it can be any part that you kind of notice. And if not, I can just point towards this. Look at these leaves. Look at these, the way it's shaped, right? At first glance, it could be like, oh yeah, here's a grape, because you'll see a bundle, right? Definitely see a bundle of berries. It's called moonseed, and that one will cause gastrointestinal issues and is considered poisonous. The other one could be wild grape, really delicious, delicious plant. And this one is Virginia creeper. And so the differences here, you can look at the tendrils, definitely, but more so the leaf shape between these two. So this one's kind of a shit picture, I apologize. But if you look at the tendrils, there's this like kind of hook within wild grape. I guess this has it as well. So that's why for these two, I usually just look at like the shape of like the leaves themselves. And this one's just mainly because it's in this like kind of like star shape whorl. And then this one is this like kind of like heart shape, still with kind of jagged margins, as well as this leaf here. But you're definitely looking at this structure. This is singular, and then this one has this 5. Between moonseed and grape, I have to get photos up for this, but moonseed won't have these tendrils. The stems themselves wind, whereas grape connects more with these tendrils. And so that's the main difference between the two, as well as like you can smash the berry, and you can see in moonseed, the seed is actually shaped as a moon, whereas with grape, it won't be shaped in that way. So those are the main differences. So you kind of smash, so first look at the leaves, distinguish between the two. And then with moonseed, you're looking for the tendrils, as well as smashing the berry before even considering consuming it, right?
So I have Virginia creeper that I'm growing in the back. Are you saying that it's edible or not?
No, it's not.
Okay. But it's a host for many, many, many caterpillars and bugs and creatures,
Yeah.
I understand.
Yeah, we all have oops. Yeah, there's so many, right? Like it's just, yeah, not edible. Just looking at it as a distinguishing factor, so you don't eat it by mistake. And the last layer is the fungal layer. So we have some chicken of the woods here, and then the hen of the woods, because mushrooms are integral and fun, and it's a really great person if you want to follow William Pandilla Brown. As part of Mycosymbiotics. He's like was a high schooler that right out of high school, we created this awesome business. Plenty of mushrooms. We're not getting into them too much, but there are different places you can get involved in Chicago. As a little disclaimer, I always say, no, 100% know your plant, but honestly, it's building relationships. Just as like we have a relationship right now, like, you know, it's different than like my relationship to my mom. You know, it's the same as with plants. Like some plants you're very intimate with and you know really well. Other plants you know of and aren't quite sure. Some plants you'll feel drawn to, some plants you won't. And it's okay. It's all part of relationship building. And this was just hopefully providing a possibility of some of the plants you can engage with during this season and within Chicago. There's a beautiful quote that says, it's a Native American proverb that says something that we're on borrowed land. And so like we don't inherit land from our ancestors, but we borrow them from our children. And so it's again, always thinking of feeding those raspberries to the youngins, feeding the next generations. And yeah, it's just, it's part of the beauty of being alive and you know, sharing. And yeah, you could get your soil test at University of Illinois Extension. I kind of went over everything with the forest preserves as well. Here's some Chicago resources I'd highly recommend if you're interested. or if you don't know of them, Open Lands Treekeeper course is, I love Open Lands so much, they're amazing. The Chicagoland Social Mycological Group, Illinois Mycological Association, Permaculture Chicago Teaching Institute, North Lawndale. It's really great. They have like a third Wednesday of the month permaculture salons and talks. There's also the Chicagoland Herbal Collective, where we have monthly meetings with herbalists in Chicago and the Native American Indian Center. A couple plant ID apps I would recommend as a starting point, but not necessarily as like your go-to to start eating things. Picture This, Seek, and iNaturalist. I have caught them being incorrect, and so just a disclaimer, but I do think it's a helpful tool to get the conversation started. You can feel free to stay connected through Instagram. Is probably the most like kind of plant food porny place that I'll just put everything on. So you're welcome. I would love to see you there and have connections. El Paseo Community Garden and Permaculture Site is a space that I developed with the community, and it's a great place to connect to a lot of perennial plants if you don't have access to land or don't have a backyard, as well as I put together a plant library database that's constantly evolving to learn more about different perennials. So for folks interested in pawpaw, you're welcome to go over there too and check out some of the things. There's also Lemon Balm Permaculture Site in North Lawndale. That's more medicinal garden with perennial herbs that I started. And both the sites now have different people to connect with that could take you around. And these sites, again, are always evolving. I'm learning to like love on a site and then like let it go, and just creating spaces and letting go. And that's been a very humbling process. But I'd love for you guys to visit and show them some love for me. And be creative, grow where you're planted. It's me downtown, always growing and planting fiber crops, and then it getting demolished because the city didn't warn the paper making studio, and having heartbreaks and just planting again, heartbreaks and planting again. So yeah, thank you all. This was a long haul. I know Kayla said an hour and I was like, huh? But thank you all for joining. And if you have any questions, I'm here for it. If you all are tired of talking about this, I'm here for it. I appreciate you all, and yeah, thank you for joining me today.
Well, that was amazing. It was like storytelling, and there were so many exciting plants to hear about that are edible. My magnolia that I used to have in the backyard, you're telling me I could have eaten those petals?
What kind did you have? Where was it? Was it more of the redder?
It looked like the ones from your picture. It looked like the
Yeah.
magnolia, but I guess my question that I put in the chat was, do these plants have to be native in order to be able to eat them? Because I don't think that was a native magnolia. So I figured no. Yeah.
No, definitely not, right? So plants like, so many of the plants like that were listed on here aren't native, right? Like they are from different areas of the world, and no, they don't need to be native to be edible. Planting natives, is an extra perk for like different pollinators, but with the changing climate and with different immigration, with different like invasive species coming in, like all these plant communities are constantly changing as well. And so planting like non-natives, I think is also useful. Although like I am a huge like native planter with the permaculture sites, especially at El Paseo, there's a lot of native species. But yeah, like it definitely doesn't have to be native to be edible. Oftentimes that's why they're brought over or cultivated in some fashion.
Some of the other plants and like the dandelions and the burdock root and things like that, we think of as weeds. And I worry that when I see some of these things growing, that they've been doused with salt or chemicals because they're close to the road. So that's the other thing that just was running through my mind. And then if there's other questions, I think we can go for another 5 minutes and then we can wrap up.
Cool. Yeah, that's definitely the case. So in the chart that I sent over to you guys so you could
Yeah.
take a look at. Like, it's again, like it's based on personal preference and personal comfort level. I would not harvest, anything that's near like a roadside or something like this, but it's again, like if you have access to these plants within like your own backyard, or for me, like I've been working with independent landowners with helping to develop more of their forested spaces or not, but oftentimes there's compaction like between their like more cultivated spaces and the forest. And so a lot of these plants are there. That's a possibility to be able to do that within the permaculture sites. So like El Paseo, working there, I know that the direction wise, if I'm facing the site, it's the east side. I think the east side is by the lake. I know that that's remediated soil. So if those plants were growing there, I would not harvest anything close to a building, because you're also looking at like building material, like toxicity. So it's again, like it's knowing that land and knowing what goes on within that space. And the closer and more intimate you can become with the land itself, the owners, whoever's like on that space. There's also something like, with dogs and dog parks, and having like pee on things, I wouldn't necessarily harvest from there, right? Like there's certain ways. And so that's why I was saying, like dandelion and a lot of the weedier plants are some of the hardest plants to harvest from, but I do invite anyone who is looking to have access to them to come to some of the permaculture sites and get connected there. And there's a lot of like chicory root, for instance, that we roasted, and it was really great, and just constantly there. So yeah, good question though.
Does anybody else want to unmute? Any other questions for Nina while we have her? It is only 4:30 in the Ukraine right now.
I have a question just about, there's so many things that you said that I wouldn't necessarily be able to recognize out in the wild. So I'd be scared to eat something and then it's the wrong thing, kind of like we were saying about the grapes. So how do you know if it's okay or not? Or you just have to look everything up? Because even when I look at a picture, I can't really say like, that's what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so this kind of goes back to, again, like this is very like counter of the way that anyone in kind of like a normal like Western society lives, right? Like we're used to going to the grocery store and there's a label tomatoes or something. I know I love my mom, my poor mom. I'm gonna harp on her for a minute, but my mom goes to the grocery store and she brings home, she goes, oh, I got cilantro. And I look at it and I'm like, Ma, that's parsley. And she's like, no, it's cilantro. And I'm like, Ma, like taste it, this is parsley. And she's like, but it said cilantro, and like we've lost some of that recognition, right? And so it's a tool that I promise you will develop with time. The thing that I would recommend is that if there's like one or two plants, just to start off with, that you're like, what, let me look to see who's outside in my backyard, like, oh, okay, and start there. Sometimes it is with the weedier plants, it is with the plantain, it is with the dandelion, it's with the burdock root. And then it's like, well, I really wanted like elderflower, and so that again, like if you're uncomfortable, I would invite you to visit some of the permaculture sites, to look at it in person and spend time with that plant. There's talk to it. I talk to all of them and I know they would love to, but just say hello, like, hi, I'm Elizabeth. I want to get to know you. Like, what's up? And like, and I do it all the time. I stopped caring, like, what people think, but I am that person. I am that crazy plant person, but, and you'll start noticing that these plants are going to start following you, right? The minute I saw elderflower here, like I was like, oh, hello, and I kept walking. I literally just have hello, and now it's everywhere. And so I'm like, okay, I'll listen to you, I'll harvest a little bit, thank you, and like, and then life happens, and there's this like coughing kid in my apartment, and I'm like, ugh. And so I'm like, great, I have elderflower. And so that's how I would first recommend that. I would recommend, downloading one of the apps, that I do think it's a good first step. I would recommend getting, some kind of ID book or something like that. If I find those really unhelpful personally, like I don't go out with my book and look, it's difficult for me to also look at this photo. I'm like, it kind of looks like it, but how do I know? I think they're helpful in that, like later, once I'm like, oh yes, this is this plant, I will go back and read up on it and look at the characteristics and look at different things. I think it's also a good source of inspiration where you could kind of flip through and be like, oh, this looks really interesting. And then, slowly, like life will show up and take you if you just slow down and just really it's slowing down and noticing. Oftentimes too, I know someone mentioned too in the preserves, they didn't find morels because like they were just talking and walking, and like when we're distracted, we don't have like this time to listen to the plants and to notice necessarily. And so my best mushroom hunting is when I'm on my own or with my doggie or something, usually on my own, but like sometimes with certain dogs, they're sometimes they find the mushrooms for me. So that's kind of what I recommend, is that visit permaculture site, but find someone in Chicago. Like if anyone's interested in the fall time, I will be back in Chicago. Like go with someone who is familiar with plants, and be able to just learn from them, because it's amazing. In the UK, I'm new to foraging seaweeds. And so I went with a local forager. And now you show them once, right? You pick up on these cues, you taste it, you see it, you feel it. And it just becomes embedded into your brain, really. And if you just slow down and notice. So that's kind of my recommendation. Like look through books, but don't necessarily rely on them. Picture this, don't necessarily rely on like the app. Visit the permaculture sites, there's labeling to it, and really like learn from the plant. And if you can, go with someone who knows about a specific plant. So even if someone doesn't know necessarily like the edible portions of it, but there's a lot of folks here that know a lot about plants. And so if you're like, I want a Monarda or something, and I have no idea, and someone could show you it, right? And you now know, oh, I can try it, you can nibble it. Like, do I like it? Do I not? Does my body say yes? Does it say no? And kind of go from there. Oh, that's a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think one of the most inspiring things was when I was in Peru hiking, and the local just grabbed something on the side where he's like, put this in your water, and it was like so good tea. And it was like, oh my gosh, like why don't we live like that here? It's really inspiring to think like, no, you can. There's things here like that. We just don't know it. We don't have the local people here don't know anything like they do in South America, how to live off the land. So it's like, it's good to hear like, no, there's actually things around here we can eat. We just need to educate ourselves.
Yeah, there's definitely, and there are folks out there, like opening up, like oftentimes, like even walking within, there's walking within forest preserves and stuff too. Like, I've met so many people from Eastern Europe who like know their shit, and I just noticed like what they're doing, but like, and it's like, oh, hey, what do you, and learning from people that way, being able to just notice the weirdos, like, a lot of Asian communities. I was pointing for me for the weirdo, but there's also a lot of Asian communities, a lot of Latino communities that like, sometimes I'm out harvesting spruce tips and they're like, oh, what is it? And then we exchange, right? Like I can never get the ginkgo fruits, because those older Asian ladies always beat me to it. They know the perfect timing of it, and I'm just waiting, and then they're all gone. so like there's definitely people out in the world who, in Chicago it's specifically, like that do know these things. And it really is that simple, right? When you go with someone. And it's funny too, because I actually have lemon balm in my water right now too, so it's like it is fun, but it is possible. Yeah. And please don't feel, I know this is a lot, and yeah, just know that like I also started from like not knowing like the different conifers and just being like a Christmas tree and not knowing, and there's a lot of room for growth and potential.
Yeah, well, I think that that's a great place for us to cap it off. Nina, thank you so much for joining us from Kiev in the Ukraine at 4:30 in the morning. And thank you to all of our guests who tuned in on this very interesting topic that was enlightening and spiritual and motivating, and just really opened our minds quite a bit. And I just appreciate everybody who stayed on this journey with us and with Nina. We do have many programs coming up. I'll send out a little recap survey to everybody, and we'll get your feedback. And we've got lots of stuff coming in the month of June. So visit our website at the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory. And we have other programs coming up as well. So I will say thank you again to everybody and have a great evening.